Alright, here we are again. I was asked by Stupei to rant about this video. I've already glanced over the comments a little bit and it seems like this is gonna be a fun one, so here we go.
Hello friends. Before we begin, I'd like to start with a little PSA. There's a good chance that next week's video might not come out. My family's been struggling monetarily for a very long time. That's why I actually swapped over from uploading every other day to uploading once a week. It takes up less bandwidth. There's a good chance that in the coming 2 weeks my family will have to choose between water, electricity, cable, and internet as to which ones we want to keep. I don't like asking for handouts, and I never have. And I'm not trying to spin some sob story. I was going to wait until I had around 1,000 subscribers before I did this, but I suppose the circumstances call for it. I've made a Patreon account. There are 3 tiers, $1, $5, $10, and they each come with their own benefits. And all of them give you access to a Discord server which I've set up for you. To anyone who does decide to donate,
I should have checked this out before to determine whether when the actual video starts.
thank you. Thank you so much. Now on with the video.
Okay,
I
thank
wrote
you.
this little pamphlet over the course of a few weeks. I wrote it in the format of a book, regardless of it only being 12 pages long. Without further ado, A Marxist Analysis of Anarchism by Matthew Lyles. Chapter 1. Fetishism and the State.
Wait, can we actually just read the pamphlet? I would fucking love it. Oh my god, thank you. Thank Christ, I don't need to listen to someone talk. Okay, especially with the bad mic quality. No offense, Matthew. Don't worry. Fetishism and the state. Within Marxism exists an analysis of how we, the consumer, interact with the products we consume. Because capitalism drives a deep wedge between what exists, for example the sweatshops that create shoes, and what we purchase, a finished pair of shoes. Yes, it becomes easy for us to disconnect a product from how it is produced, alienation. It then becomes easy for producers to market the product, say shoes as something bold, empowering, awe-inspiring, and freedom-giving, regardless of the slave labor used to produce them. Yes, commodity fetishism, commodity revulsion is the opposite he proposes, or they propose. Because people also tend to fetishize the state, just as they fetishize commodities. Both commodity fetishism and revulsion miss the mark of understanding a commodity for its use value. To fetishize a commodity is to ascribe supernatural aspects to it that would be transcendent or metaphysical aspects, while commodity revulsion is the expression of hatred for an item because it has been commodified. Okay, I can immediately see where it's going. Alright, well, I fundamentally don't disagree that a concept like commodity revulsion exists and is true in a sense, because obviously we can, in certain lefty circles, we definitely have the mindset of seeing like a brand name on something and going like, ugh, fuck this noise. Like the Nike sign covering like the sweatpants. Like there's perfectly good sweatpants, like just the use value if you just have your good, well-produced and so on sweatpants. But slap a fucking brand logo on it and immediately you've created a lifestyle product. Alright, let's continue. The same can be written about the state and its actions. Some fetishize the state and turn law into religion, yeah, legalists for example, and believe the state can do no harm. Others find hatred toward the state and believe it can do no good. These, of course, are the anarchists. Okay, already, right out the gate, strawmanning the fuck out of anarchism. Okay, let me explain this. I know it's just the preface right here. We need to go through it bit by bit. If I'm gonna attack something that will be elaborated on later, don't mind me. I will address my shortcomings later on if I happen to have shortcomings here. But no, anarchists don't have a hatred towards the state. Anarchists have a critical position towards the state, or better to say, towards hierarchy. The general anarchist ethos is the question to challenge unjust hierarchy and put the onus of justifying itself on the hierarchy itself. in the words of Noam Chomsky at least. So if we look at a hierarchical system, for example the state, but let's look at something way more mundane, a parent and a kid. An anarchist would not say the parent's hierarchy is by default unjustified because a priori anarchists assume hierarchy to be bad. No, we would look at the situation. What is the outcome of the situation? The kid is obviously, because it's a kid, not necessarily able to completely make reasonable judgments about, for example, the danger of crossing a street. A parent would then have the authority and the justified hierarchical position to grab the child by the neck and prevent them from, going on the street and being run over by a car. This is a very justified hierarchy. The parent knows better. The parent is aware of the danger. The principal function of this hierarchy of parent and kid is one of protection, because the kid can't protect themselves yet, but also one of teaching, one of ascending the kid dialectically into a state of the responsibility they can take for themselves. Now, anarchists, I want to say, don't dismiss the state just because they hate it, just because they believe it can do no good. Obviously, the state can do good. Nobody's like, okay, I don't want to say nobody. Of course, there's some fucking strawman people who exactly believe what the strawman here proposes, but it's not like anarchists don't believe the state can do no good. I think personally every good anarchist right now should be supporting a certain state institutions, like, for example, welfare. We kind of depend on our livelihoods right the fuck now to have welfare, the livelihood of the poor, So this is something we need to support, at least to some extent. So hating the state out of principle, just because you hate it, because of some irrational revulsion, is bad. There's no doubt about that, but nobody honestly believes that. Alright, we, the Marxists, find that the synthesis within this dialectic is the correct line to hold in order to produce tangible socialism. Okay, first off, let's not try to... This statement is pretty loaded. It presupposes a lot of things. For example, this dialectic. Okay, of course we have a dialectic between the individual and state. That's obvious. But what this presupposes is a very simplistic Marxist reading of the dialectic that I often find with people who've just gotten into it and, didn't ever go back to Hegel and looked at it a bit more in detail. What we have here is this supposition that these theses and antitheses of state and individual always exist and are kind of like a priori true, and that in a sense the synthesis would be better than what came before it, just by nature of it being a synthesis. You will not find that this holds to be true in either Marx nor Hegel. Theoretical issues aside, we should rather approach the idea of sublation. Sublation is the more Hegelian take towards dialectic. You have two ideas that negate each other, and the sublation is that we ascend into a higher idea that discards the parts of the previous idea that didn't function properly, that we didn't need. They don't disappear or cease to exist. We simply discard them and reach a higher, more purified version of the idea. So, and this is socialism. Produce tangible socialism. Well, tangible, this is already pretty loaded, but I would agree. This is socialism. We take the capitalist state of material relations. We view the problems it causes for the individuals, for the poor, for whomever it causes problems for. There are plenty. And we think about the idea of what is the next state. And this would certainly be socialism. I completely agree. Socialism, by the way, relates more as to a mode of production than rather like a prescriptive, complete system of state and government. For example, there are so many ways you can organize socialism, including anarchist models. You can have councils, you can have syndicates, you can have a party, a vanguard party. None of those are actually predetermined. Prescriptive within the idea of socialism itself, and to claim otherwise would be to confuse, for example, Marx and Engels' political text for their theoretical work. So, let's go further. Anarchism predates Marxism. Yes, there have been anarchists before Marxism, and is a natural response to the extreme fetishism of the state which existed by the time which anarchism was birthed. Okay. the initial anarchists came before the first Marxists. That is true, and it is also exactly true as you say it here. They are also called sometimes utopian socialists because they have strong moralistic fantasies. They have a utopian state of mind in which they suppose. Let's take Pyotr Kropotkin as an example. Not that he would predate Marx or anything, but let's take him as an example. His supposition of what anarchism is basically a new ontological way of viewing the state of civilization. So the common theory of the state, the justification for governments at the time of Kropotkin, was still going back to Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes claimed, or rather imagined, a natural state of humanity without government, which is basically the war state. That without rule and order, without government, without state, which is a giant, powerful leviathan, as Thomas Hobbes put it, there would be chaos. People would cut each other's throats, kill each other, be greedy, rob each other, and destroy whatever they want. Because only the state can fight against a human nature which is so greedy and destructive. Now, Kropotkin saw this and was like, nah, I think humans are actually pretty good and cooperative by nature. And I think the natural state of things without the state would be harmony, would be cooperation. And you know what? I think that's fucking dumb. I think that's completely wrong. And I know this is exactly what is being addressed here. The early 19th century anarchism, moralizing, utopian, socialist fantasy of everyone is good inside and deep down it will only work. And of course, it would be this way just like Hegel said it would. Humanity tends to make progress by jumping from one extreme to the next. Only slowly progress is achieved. Only as long as progress is achieved. And so, of course, anarchism was born in an overtly nationalistic world where the state could supposedly do no harm while killing also masses of natives in the name of the country, blah, blah, blah. As this contradiction grew and matured, so did capitalism. As capitalism spread from country to country, the proletariat also became more and more advanced, and their interests became more developed. We would find this synthesis between fetishism and revulsion in the writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Friedrich, not Frederick. You fuck. I'm a German. I know those names. When Prussian Germany was on the eve of a bourgeois revolution. Okay, so here the author is tracing the dialectic and is positing Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels as the synthesis between fetishism and revulsion of the state. Which isn't, within the terms the author has defined here, isn't necessarily wrong. So they certainly were critical of the state of things and the modes of production, and yeah. This is dialectics in motion, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. We hold it to be apparent that Marxism does not fetishize the state as we understand it is inherently a structure of class oppression and other forms of oppression which cannot be underplayed. We also do not demonize the state as we understand its dialectical necessity, as well as its physical necessity in raising large standing disciplined armies necessary for armed struggle against whatever major power intervenes in our struggle. This dialectical necessity is a cute little rhetorical device, but you have actually not shown, we have actually not been shown the dialectical necessity at all. Like, it's been claimed here that there is a dialectical necessity. So, where is it? Is the dialectic of individual versus state something that is a priori true, that exists even like in a vacuum? Is that why we need to both sides of the dialectic? Is this why it just fundamentally exists? Or are you just positing this here? So you can see where this is leading. This is like leading language. They are trying to trot you along and get you to a point where you have the idea in your head that the dialectic is necessary, that everyone who challenges the basis, the existence of, or the absence of one side of the dialectical thing, dialectical motion, is naive. I mean, I would even disagree that we cannot get rid of the idea of state, of governance, as a part of a dialectical process. But it certainly isn't a dialectical necessity as is put here. As to go with Hegel, who, by the way, didn't use the thesis-antithesis synthesis. I've also fallen for this meme in the past, but someone has informed me Hegel didn't use this and it is ascribed to him, but actually he only went with negation and sublation. There's a slight difference. It's an important difference, which makes this rigid structure, which always supposes a binary relationship of thesis and antithesis, or an orthogonal relationship between thesis and antithesis, absurd. Because it's so simplistic, when Hegel's dialectic is actually a much more flexible, more malleable concept than it is posited to be here. So, let's talk about physical necessity for raising large standing disciplined armies. There we go into the tanky shit. Oh my god. So, let me just, since this isn't really my point here, I suppose, let me just posit that anarchism is not agnostic to the, or not in opposition to the idea of having armies, defensive armies. It would be anarchist militias. You can investigate history. You can look at today's Rojava in Syria and how they fight against ISIS with their militias and soldiers. You can look at the Spanish anarchists who for years have fought against Spanish fascists. There were armies. You can study those. George Orwell, for example, has written on the Spanish anarchist armies back in the war, and he's talked about how surprisingly efficient, but also how surprisingly well functioning these armies were, considering that your officer during a struggle, during a fight, who was like belting commands and orders, would straight after the fight be just one of your buddies and would share a cigarette with you without any of the hierarchical and problematic structures that come with military usually, where discipline is enforced through strict codes and a lot of physical and psychological violence. So anarchism can have armies. It doesn't need to be a state. It depends on how we organize it. And I'm not here to talk at length about organizing armies large scale to fight off imperial forces, because this is where this is going. Let me just say, anarchists neither reject the idea, nor is it impossible to conceive of a bottom-up organized militia with people of different communes networking in confederations and organizing an army. That's absolutely not inconceivable. Okay. It is actually quite a reality to us that the anarchist critiques of the state and their problems with the state are entirely correct, real, and reasonable. Okay. Good, we agree. Before even needing to hear them, we can concede to them every point on oppression and the rights of man. However, they don't matter. While they point out and analyze oppression, which they very much exists, the analysis of the state means nothing if they can't produce a practical way in which to abolish the state. Aha. The anarchist reading this may denounce this work. Wait, what? Oh, the anarchist reading this may denounce this work and declare that anarchism has produced a practical way in which to abolish the state. We shall go into detail on why that's false. Okay, buddy. Impress me. But first of all, let's start. I want to remind you of Marx and Engels and how their fundamental thesis was that the end of history would be achieved through stateless and classless communism, and how they supposed the way to go there would be is through an intermediary state of socialism, after which, when class has been equalized, the state would just dissolve. And here's where I fundamentally think that you, in focusing on these old-timey utopian socialist moralizing anarchists, you kind of fail to address the actual anarchist discourse. Because anarchism has moved on from its pre-Marxian state, because as soon as Marx entered the frame and proposed his ideas, anarchism adapted. Anarchism transformed from a form of utopian moralizing fantasy into a critique of Marxism. a critique of Marxism which shares with Marxism most of the analysis, but is fundamentally doubtful about two things. First of all, the exact nature of the transitionary stage from capitalism to a classless, stateless communism. And second, especially second, the idea that the state would just dissolve. Anarchists contend with the Marxist analysis of means of production being determining class, and class determining basically politics, that a political state will always defend the class interest of its most powerful class, and so on and so on. This is analysis that anarchists don't refuse, but contend and say, we have to think a bit further. Necessarily, you have to think that it is not only class which generates political power and thus forms the state as to support class interest. It is also the state which in itself can have its own interests of retaining its power and keeping its position of power. Anarchists locate the biggest theoretical failing of Marx and Engels in exactly the idea that they fail to imagine how the state would actually dissolve, and instead just positing it, not seeing that the state in itself would become a place of power interests, of a position of self-perpetuating power, an interest in itself that will not give up its place of power to achieve an actual classless and stateless society. In my view, the Marxist mindset, like the early Marxist mindset, even modern Marxists have moved from this position. And I suppose that everyone who thought this is like a great point right here should read some more Marxism that came out in the 20th and 21st century. But, let's go on. I've lost my train of thought. So we will probably in the scope of this work talk about practical ways in which to abolish the state. We can theory craft a bit, and we can make some concessions and approximate the Marxist position with the anarchist position here. But what must be very important here is that we move on from this simplistic notion of fetishizing the state versus revulsion from the state. Because neither a modern Marxist nor a modern anarchist should think that these are like valid positions to hold in any capacity. What we've found in the past, in the history, is that instead of dissolving or instead of approximating the communist principles of worker self-management and council democracy, we have found a lot of fetishization of the state. And actually, if my biggest rebuttal would be to go over the past fetishizations of states and of leaders and look at exactly how we don't find like a reasonable synthesis here. But this is not a structured rebuttal to this. I will stop here with mentioning it, and I want to continue because otherwise this will be a 2-hour long video and I don't want it to be 2 hours long. Okay. Revolution and organization. Okay. The anarchist conception of revolution in which all members of the proletariat are free to participate equally is inadequate and carries improper analysis. Class consciousness, like most things under capitalism, develops unequally. Such is the reason for the existence of the advanced, moderate, and backwards elements of the proletariat. Yeah, none of this is false. The only thing is false that I don't know where this anarchist strawman is coming from. The anarchist conception of revolution in which all members of the proletariat are free to participate equally. Who is this person? This is such a vague claim that I don't even know where to locate this. Who is this person who claims that everyone will... Of course we need to reach class consciousness first. Of course we need to teach and spread the message. Of course we gotta create movements and have the idea out there. What else? Because of the existence of these different elements, it becomes necessary to form organizational structures by the advanced for moderate against the backward. This is what Marx's justification for the vanguard. Correct me if I'm wrong, Marx didn't justify the vanguard. The vanguard was justified mainly by Lenin drawing from Marxist literature. Okay, let's dive into this. By the advanced for the moderate, against the backward. So what you're saying here is that reactionary, anti-revolutionary forces should be acted against. Well, while that may, to some extent, be true, I don't think we should codify this focus into 3 neatly divided categories. I don't know if this is just done for rhetorical devices or not, but I want to call for taking a bit of care here. It is indeed necessary to form organizational structures. As I talked about earlier, we have some justified hierarchies. One justified hierarchy is those who know, being able to teach those who don't know. And now comes my big point that will probably be a leitmotif for the entire thing here. This is a good hierarchy because a teacher in a hierarchy has one goal: to raise up those he is teaching to be able to be teachers as well. Please let us think of revolutionary organizations as this. Please let us think of revolutionary organizations as teachers who will teach the capacity and the capability and the critical reasoning and the analysis that their subjects will become advanced to their level. That the hierarchy in itself has only one goal, which is the dissolution of the hierarchy. You can see how this works well with Marxist principles, the dissolution of the state. Through the model of the teacher, we have a believable theoretical idea of how this would work. The Vanguard Party? Why would it dissolve itself? Its goal is not to get everyone in the Vanguard Party. Its goal is not to ascend everyone to be exactly a member of the Vanguard Party. It's just not what it does. Its goal is not necessarily to just create class consciousness, but rather to create revolutionary action with a forceful vanguard that pushes through, while not ascending the subjects below it. Alright, let's go on. Many anarchists and anarcho-syndicalist types have put forth the ideas of guiding organizations, not understanding them to be vanguards. Is vanguardism only for Marxists? Why can't anarchists also construct a vanguard? The purpose of the vanguard is to educate the masses and engage the bourgeois state in political struggle until it can contest the current state for its legitimacy. Okay, if we're not talking about the Vanguard Party, but just like a vanguard of, let's say, teachers, we actually agree. I don't know about these anarchists and anarcho-syndicalists who don't put forward ideas of guiding organizations, because I've been in a few anarchist organizations and I've collaborated with them. We go out there, we do political struggle, we educate people, we talk to people. What else is this if not a vanguard in your theories here? You just claim that there isn't this organizational structure which pushes for political struggle and teaches and educates the masses. Like, what? Where's this coming from? The vanguard engages in class struggle against the bourgeois, and after it has built dual power, elevates this class struggle to a revolutionary level. So, here's probably a way where I can introduce... first of all, this chapter was supposed to be about the fact why anarchism doesn't have practical, workable ways for this, but apparently it's all about just explaining some ideas of vanguardism and claiming anarchism doesn't do it. But, okay. So, libertarian socialism is just a form of socialism, by the way, just with organizational structures that avoid a vanguard party. It doesn't mean it does not have a vanguard in this sense the author means here. What we can do is bring the class struggle and the class consciousness into our own communities and start building a dual power by establishing structures within our community, by creating workers' co-ops, housing cooperatives, by creating community centers that are anarchists and leftist and help people out by sheltering the homeless in squats and anarchist workers' co-op houses. We can have anarchist bookshops. We can have anarchist bars. We can have anarchist concert halls. The principal idea here is we can even have anarchists in local government, just to not be like part of the state apparatus, but instead to support the local causes and prevent like local government from taking action against anarchists and dedicate some money to anarchist projects and so on and so on. This would be a very good thing that could be done later down the line. But the first thing is establish yourself in your local community. Reach a state where the anarchist bookshop is visited by the old lady from next doors, who doesn't even have anything to do with anarchism, and she knows those anarchists run a good bookshop. Build trust in local communities and spread leftist ideas. Make them palatable, make them approachable. Spread the idea that we're people trying to create a more cooperative, more solidarity-driven society in the now. Make people join your anarcho-syndicalist unions. Go out, help the workers, motivate them to join your cause for their struggles. This is how we build dual power. We have grassroots power in our communities, and we want to spread it around in more communities, in closely networked. Anarchist housing cooperatives are one of the most interesting ways I've seen this be done. Let me actually quickly look this up. So, let me quickly pull up the English version of this page. Alright, Mietshäuser Syndikat is a self-organized living solidarity-based economy, an apartment house syndicate. So, this is a syndicate that deprivatizes housing. They buy housing from bank credits, because yes, banks give anarchists credit. They have established a good name for themselves. The banks know they will pay back their money, and this means the anarchists now own these houses, and they run them as a cooperative. The tenants join the cooperative as soon as they rent, and have a say in the organizing. And the chief goal of this housing cooperative is to deprivatize housing, which means that it will not be exposed to the whims of the free market anymore. This is a bit more complicated. You can check out the website I'm showing here. This is how many houses they already have. 147 different houses in different areas of Germany. I've been to some of those in my area. They function wonderfully. They have cheap prices. They are clean. They are well maintained. They are social. They are not privatized. Their rents do not rise with times and profit interest. And we've basically abolished landlords in this way. This is huge. And the people living there, they don't move out. They stay. They love it. You know what? Anyone who sees this project function immediately gains like a +10 bonus on trust in anarchism. Imagine, this is very hypothetical, but imagine if like 80% of all housing is owned by such a cooperative. Wow. We would have fixed a huge fucking chunk of like basic needs of people. And we would have established anarchism in a lot of communities. In a lot of people's minds, anarchism already functions, already runs. Add this with workers' co-op, and we basically start dismantling capitalism from bottom up. I'm not saying that the state will take this on the nose and just don't react, but this is an entirely different question. I talked about this already. Anarchists are not completely averse or against the idea of having military action, especially for self-defense. But let's continue. But just as the vanguard engages in revolution, it becomes itself a state, full with a ruling class, structure of class power and armed guards, and a territory to go with it. Not in the way I described. Indeed, any territory held by the vanguard holds all the necessity and trappings of a state. So then how could you begin to go about achieving statelessness? You would first need to begin with a spontaneous revolution of the broad masses, which would presuppose equal levels of political consciousness, equal development, which is unnatural and yet to be seen. Oh, unnatural. Okay. So if we follow my idea of what I described as a vanguardism, and I've just listed a few examples. I know that I didn't outline the comprehensive, all-encompassing amount of this. For this, you can read some more Murray Bookchin, for example, because he goes into a lot of detail on this stuff. But what we create, and this is a very good point that is brought up here. First of all, ruling class, structures of class power. Imagine if it wasn't an anarchist housing cooperative, but instead an anarchist company with an anarchist boss, which is completely antithetical and dumb. But what if this was a good boss, and this good boss would take care that the rents aren't bad? Well, this is what is being proposed here by the Vanguard. We don't solve the issue of a boss, we simply solve the issue of the bad boss. For some people this may be enough, but I don't think it is enough. Which is exactly why all the tenants buy into the cooperative, why we gradually, from bottom-up grassroots organization and basic council democratic or whatever syndicate organization structures, we have them from bottom-up. We create political consciousness by participation in a political apparatus. And this is why we establish ourselves in local communities and get local people familiar with the idea. Why we get them into cooperatives, why they can be collaborating with our unions, why they can be living in our housing cooperatives. In every walk of life, can they be made familiar with the ideas, with the responsibilities and the consciousness of political active participation. And you know what then happens? You don't create a vanguard with a ruling class. You create a vanguard that grows as it educates more people and includes more people in its struggle. You don't create structures of class power except the ones that will dissolve through knowledge, through teaching, through education of how we spread ideas and how we include people into our systems of education and growing into the anarchist cooperatives. An armed guard and a territory to go with it? Well, an armed guard, as I said, could be militia, a voluntary militia, and it could be territory. Well, how would you go to... Probably a territory, but as long as the territory is dissolved into mostly horizontal, in the absence of unjust hierarchy, this would not be a state. Could be a commune. If we draw some arbitrary line between this is our commune, these are your communes, or this is our syndicate and this is your syndicate, sure, but those will be networked by the use of councils and confederations. Read Bookchin. And if you don't want to read Bookchin, don't complain to me that you don't know anything about modern anarchism. Spontaneous revolution of the broad masses. Well, in a sense, I want to call it insurrection instead of revolution. Suppose we have this vanguard, which is very organized in communities, grassroots, based democratic. People are basically, like most people are employed in workers' co-ops. Most people are living in housing co-ops, and so on and so on. You know the drill. Then it wouldn't be so much a spontaneous revolution of the broad masses as it is an insurrection. We simply realize we can't just stand up and leave the capitalism and the state apparatus behind because we already created structures that work outside of it. As long as we prevent the state as it exists from crushing them before we can do the insurrection point, basically, where we flip the switch and say, now we abandon the old institutions. So how to do this? For an American, start voting the most lefty candidate you can think of that will become president, for example. Vote Bernie Sanders and start building up in your local community. Even Bernie Sanders, as liberal and as pro-capitalism as he still is a step towards the left. We want to move the window. Class consciousness arises by us moving the window. We must restore the name of socialism. We must restore the principles it brings, and then start. If we have a more leftist government, we can make tax advantages for building workers' cooperatives, for example. And if people have tax advantages for workers' cooperatives, they can grow and we can have more workers' cooperatives. Then we need to work on deprivatizing and building workers' cooperatives wherever we can in our community. And so on and so on and so on. You know, the process goes from there. We can have the support of local government, of national governments, in the sense that we just have to make sure only those get elected which will not fucking kill us. Alright. Maybe, and this is what I don't know. Maybe if we go this way, we won't have to have the armed overtaking of big capitalist companies. Maybe. If not, that's still in the cards. It's not like it's kind of prohibited. Instead, we have a much wider class consciousness already being spread, so whatever has to happen, has to happen. See, I will not claim that I know what will happen or that I know exactly how it will go. I will say that whenever the situation arises, something will happen. And whether or not that is violent revolution or not, I can tell. I can't tell. Absolutely not. Why would I be able to tell? So what I'm saying is that we can pursue this spreading, as I'm explaining it, the spreading of class consciousness and the spreading of loosely anti-authoritarian and horizontal and social organizations without any of it becoming a state in itself and a ruling class and a structure of class power. Revolution is the foremost, though, in the mind of the advanced proletarian, the communist. For the advanced element, spontaneity seems reasonable and sometimes preferable to the long and enduring time that is required from us in the making of a legitimate vanguard. See, I disagree with this. Okay, this is in principle a very easy thing. Do we want a society in which people are competent and well able to live in a solidarity-based society? Or do we want to quickly paint over the scars that capitalism and the state have caused over decades or centuries even, and simply take them as they are and put them in a socialist state? I want to bring an example from the opposite side. My parents were born and lived and raised in East Germany, which was, of course, behind the wall and the Soviet satellite state and so on, socialism. And what happened when the wall came down is that the socialist education they had never taught them much about capitalism, never taught them how capitalism functions, how it manipulates. It always has just presented as the enemy. But you know what it also hasn't done? It also hasn't taught properly the leftist theory. Instead of being capable to discuss Marx and critically discuss Marx and analyze like states of relations of production, what they had to do in school, and they told me about this personally, is learn phrases by heart and just recite them to get a good grade. If you perfectly deliver the content but use different language, this was already a deduction on the grade. This wasn't wanted in the schools, in the exams. This wasn't wanted. You were supposed to recite it completely. What this strikes me as is a please shut up and just do as we tell you mentality. And even though socialism, and I agree with socialism, is a correct system of organizing labor, for some reason they didn't find it in themselves to actually want to bring their subjects to an educated position of actually being able to make and understand the theory behind it. And what happened? The wall came down, and the first thing my parents did, go over the wall, saw, oh shit, such a pretty car. Commodity fetishism instantly entered them incapable to discern like marketing and advertisement and all its complexities and like manipulative qualities. They went and got ripped off by a used car salesman. Why were they easily ripped off? Because they were naive. They weren't taught about like deceptive strategies and so on and so on. They were simply deceived up to that point. In the last 30 years, East Germany has been polarized. Leftist votes are dwindling, have been better a while ago. Now they're extremely dwindling because now they're being swayed by right-wing parties. You know why they're being swayed by right-wing parties? Because these old people who've been brought up under socialism and taught to only like follow the strict reciting of the theory instead of like actual understanding of the theory. Well, now there's someone new who's telling them easy answers to their problems and is not educating them, but rather just giving them ideas to think in order to understand why they are not well off or happy. Now the fucking right-wing parties come and take exactly this strategy of not educating the people, but just telling them what to think. And this is what I'm principally opposed to. This, by the way, goes also to the core of why I'm an anarchist. As an anarchist, I believe in only justified hierarchy. As such, a state is justified as long as its purpose is to teach its subjects and dissolve itself. How it will dissolve itself is critical, which is also why I cannot support the state fully and have sort of a revulsion to it, if you want to say that. But also fundamentally, I think we should aim to create competent, educated, intelligent people who are able to assess new situations, are adaptable, flexible, have a solid understanding of theory, and can discuss it in its intricacies. Spontaneity in revolution, to get back to this point that I highlighted here, is thus not desirable. Spontaneity means that we just piss in the wind. Well, that's a bad metaphor, but you know what I mean. I should have relayed to you now, I think just spontaneously can't work. Which is why I say we need grassroots, we need to establish local communities, we need to spread class consciousness in a sense that we gain knowledge and insight into class relations, into modes of production, into how the power systems function. We need to analyze power. We need to analyze how we are made subjects of the state, subjects of a boss, subjects of a job, how marketing sets ideas in our head, how politics and election campaigns set ideas in our heads, how modes of production set ideas into our heads, how we are created to believe in an individualistic mindset in capitalism. All these things, I think we all should be concerned with. Our vanguard should be teaching this. And part of our vanguard is whoever gets this. Not some power that is given to them by any means, but simply the teacher power of knowledge, of understanding, of being able to communicate theory to someone else. This is why not spontaneity is reasonable, but long and enduring time that is required for us to make a legitimate vanguard. This is what we need. And I know we have issues that are pressing. If there's a vanguard revolution coming, is there a fucking spontaneous revolution coming up and it's about climate change, I'm gonna pick up the gun and help you. Easy. Because climate change will kill us all, and if we don't change that immediately, then I'm out. I'm out there with you. Completely. But here's the thing. If we can help it, let's enable us to progress carefully, slowly, methodically towards a socialist class consciousness. Let us vote politicians who short-term can aid us in a utilitarian way. Like Bernie Sanders, who can short-term aid us by not demonizing us, by shifting the Overton window more left, by addressing climate change issues, by addressing issues of poverty and debt, and so on. Let's do that. Let's unite for that. And continue to spread class consciousness through all means we can find. However, what is reasonable and justifiable to us cannot be mistaken with what is reasonable and justifiable to a class, to the masses. Revolution is perhaps the widest wedge which the advanced element and its supporters can drive between itself and the backward reactionaries. Because of this fact, we know that spontaneity alienates the masses. Well, yeah, that's true. The advanced element is inherently a minority of people, as has been seen for centuries. They currently are, true. Which is why I want to teach people. I reject the mindset where we cannot acclimate the moderates and even the backwards people, where we cannot educate them to reach this point, where we cannot convince them to join our cause or see their own self-interest. Certainly, there are people who we cannot take out of these systems, but I hold true that everyone who has worked in a workers' co-op will not come away from that with the experience that socialism isn't good. If we teach them about what a workers' co-op is and what the principles underlying are and why it works so well. Communists are always a minority of the population for as long as unequal development of political consciousness exists. This is why we should make the political consciousness spread it more equally. From previous revolutions, we understand that the moderate element sides with the advanced element, not because they are simply pro-communist, but because they are anti-backward. Spontaneity is possible, yes, but only in areas with high concentration of the advanced. Yeah. CNT, Catalonia, and the Bavarian Soviet Republic both serve as great examples of what happens when you attempt a proletarian revolution without a sufficient vanguard. While elements of a vanguard were developed in both examples denied the role of the vanguard as guiding organization and attempted to have the proletariat alone seize the power for itself spontaneously. Well, no. Catalonia actually has done kind of what I did. The CNT has established anarchist principles and anarchist unions and anarchist workplaces in their communities for the last 30 years before the civil war broke out. Because spontaneous revolutions are only participated in by the advanced, and the advanced element is inherently small because the revolutions are wedged, the masses become alienated from their own revolution. I don't know what this is just repetition. Catalonia has successfully run an anarchist state and was crushed by imperial powers because they were fucking small and fought on from every side, including Western allied people attacking them. Bavarian Soviet Republic I haven't read up on too much, but I suppose it either failed. I'm not going to make claims about this. I'm going to admit I haven't read up on the Bavarian Soviet Republic much. We take from this that spontaneity is inadequate in making of sustainable revolutions, that a vanguard inherently creates a state out of itself. I agree with the spontaneity's inadequate part, but I disagree with the vanguard inherently creates a state out of itself. So, I feel like I'm not sure if anyone who's listening to this and is a fan of this original video or essay will simply reject what I'm saying, but think about the teacher dialectic that I told you. The way in which the hierarchy of a teacher that is justified by a difference in knowledge, awareness, intelligence, and so on, is absolved by giving exactly these tools to its subjects. This is how you create something, a vanguard that is not creating a state out of itself. Let me drink a sip of water. I'll return to the next chapter. The point of a revolution. What is the point of a revolution? We do not engage in revolution for revolution's sake. Revolution is the only means by which we can alleviate a portion of global suffering. Such has been the reason for every revolution. There is no alleviation of global suffering by way of reform. Even if we were to pass the most liberal, most social democratic reforms to aid our people, we have not alleviated global suffering. We have merely shipped it somewhere else. I agree. Partially. My model of grassroots bottom-up is functioning within the framework of how we have currently arranged nations. We would, of course, if I start in my town in Germany to do anarchist stuff, which I do, and establish the community, which I do, we would at some point, of course, maybe get someone into local governments. We would get more people to our cause. We would spread the idea. But then the next step is, how do we get this to our neighbors, to the next town over, to the federal state, to the nation, and then how to the next nation? International cooperation is incredibly important. If you're truly invested in leftist causes and are willing to fight, consider helping out in Rojava. This is exactly what they're doing. They're defending themselves. They're fighting against ISIS. They're in the middle of a civil war. Yet they're still building an anarchist community that is ever growing. International help, solidarity, is something we need. And I completely agree with the author here. We can pass the most liberal, most social democratic reforms to aid our people. But you know what? We can also pass some democratic socialism reforms and programs to help out and aid internationally once we've come a good way with our own internal issues. And as an individual anarchist, as well as an individual Marxist, you and I, both of us, only have those means available to us. If what you're saying is that you want a big vanguard revolution now in order to help internationally, I don't think your plan is actually that much more believable than my plan. Because, if you do a revolution, this will create some internal destability and turmoil first. There will have to be a lot of shit and unrest and instability in your state, which we can see easily also in the Soviet Union. Of course, the first goal was to spread like the international proletariat revolution and so on and so on and so on. But that's not actually like something that can be immediately done if you have internal struggles of acclimating to a completely new mode of production from here to now. Well, I know you want the vanguard, the long-standing, like, gradual change towards revolution and so on and so on. And if done properly, I don't doubt this would be then much easier to create quick internal stability and help internationally. But I don't see exactly how much that's different from the anarchist approach at all. I also want to create communities until we can change the mode of production in our country significantly. But also, we're going to start with tightly knit communities of strongly educated people with high class consciousness if what I said will be happening. I'm not going to go make any ludicrous claims, but I'm just going to say, if the class consciousness is higher and we create more advanced proletarians, as you put it, we would probably and most likely find more people with high solidarity willing to voluntarily join a cause instead of, being made into a state-sanctioned army and being shot if they desert or whatever. I'm just spitballing. Sorry. So that we see the point of every revolution, to secure the alleviation of suffering at any cost. Well, if that cost is more suffering, then I don't agree. If we don't approach revolution with a mindset of liberating and educating, first and foremost, to create a long-lasting, better state of alleviating suffering, then we failed conceptually. It is here that the anarchists find themselves struggling. Take, for example, CNT Catalonia. The CNT relied on armed military units as the base for all military activities. Seeing how undisciplined and useless the military was, this is, by the way, a ludicrous claim, the CNT attempted to reform its military into disciplined army with conscription. This was at once met with waves of backlash, even as Franco moved even closer into the territory. Why? Because anarchists are not concerned with creating simply a better world, simply alleviating suffering, but instead with creating the idealized world. You make huge theoretical claims here. You're supposing an essential anarchist. Essentially, the anarchist is only concerned with creating an idealized world. Where are you drawing this from? Citation needed? Your little historical going into the CNT story is cute and all, but I don't see how you can claim that all anarchists are exactly like these anarchists, and how even that historical example can be debated, but I won't right now. Can we talk about theory? Can you look at an anarchist writer and show me exactly where they are not like concerned with creating a better world and alleviating suffering? Yeah, I know. We've talked about this earlier. You've only experienced the moralizing utopian anarchists of old. You've probably not engaged with more contemporary anarchist literature. It's okay. I'll just tell you that this is really not where it ends. I am absolutely concerned with simply a better world, which is why I have support for institutions currently, which could help us, which I also support other leftist projects, like probably Marxists and communists. Well, technically I consider myself a Marxist, just an anarchist, someone who doesn't fundamentally reject Marxist analysis at all, instead incorporates it like very principally into all my political ideas. We want a better world, which is why we cooperate, which is why we want to create a better world. But just creating an idealized world? Friendo, listen the fuck up. I don't know what is more idealized than to believe that just by having a strong-ass strongman vanguard party, you will suddenly reach levels of class consciousness and competence and education and understanding of theory in your people that they will actually be able to understand fully, morally, ethically, philosophically, and ontologically the state that they exist in, and the systems that they run, and the modes of production that shape them, instead of just, it sounds like you want them to simply get a better world. You want them to first be mindless drones following the vanguard until at some point, maybe, I don't believe in half-assing this shit. If you create people who just follow and aren't critical and theoretically educated while you run your Vanguard stuff and do whatever you need to, you will not have the point where the state dissolves because you don't create actual class consciousness. So, buddy, come on, let's meet in the middle. You and me talk. Can we create class consciousness and educate our people as a vanguard while we organize societies in mostly, as much as possible, stateless, classless structures? I would like to see this, because I don't believe in competence arising out of thin air, out of nothingness, and I don't believe the state dissolving into nothingness either, because I think those are very idealized worlds. Same idealization, by the way, as the good leader, the strong, benevolent dictator. No, all this is bullshit. The Vanguard Party is also just a very cute fantasy. The anarchists in Catalonia were not concerned with restricting certain freedom in order to protect what they already had achieved, but instead panicked at the thought of restrictions because they said restrictions denied them the ability to believe that they had achieved anarchy and free association. Citation needed. I don't even know what you're talking about. Historically, when the revolution threatens the anarchist ideology, it is not the ideology that the anarchists call into question and critique, but instead the revolution itself. Citation needed. The anarchists have attempted time and time again to dismantle authoritative structures. Why do they fail to dismantle the state in the whole? Hey, why has communism never worked in the whole? What a fucking stupid argument, bro. You should know how this is. You should fucking know how this works, man. Like, seriously, did you really just bring this argument? The why did it never work? What is the answer that you commies like to give? Imperialist forces? Not true socialism? Well, that, or you think the People's Republic of China is communism, but, you know, it isn't. Because the liberation of the individual cannot be achieved before the liberation of the whole collective. Aha! They go hand in hand. This is where we get to dialectics, my friend. This is where we get to dialectics. Sublation means that between the individual and the collective, we realize that both are constitutive parts that are both necessary and constitute each other. We need both at the same time. The sublation is not the shedding of individual freedoms or the collective freedoms, but we ascend where we shed the oppressive apparatus through collectively liberating us in order to give us individual freedoms, my friend. This is sublation. You know, Hegel's definition of the end of history was actually just the time by which we realize the ideas and the means by which everyone can make themselves free. The ideas, that is the end of history. Hegel called the end of history not when we've actually like physically accomplished this. No, only the state when we have gained the ideas necessary for every individual to be free. The means by which this is accomplished is not included in the end of history idea. And you know what? Collective action and individuals making themselves free belong together. Their dialectical relation, and this is also what Hegel's misreading often causes, their dialectic is not one of thesis and antithesis. The individual is not the antithesis to the collective. The collective is part. The individual is part of the collective, and the collective fundamentally shapes the individual. It's a relationship between the two. This is dialectics. Read Hegel. Don't just reiterate what people tell you about thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. It's not true. For Hegel, life and death weren't necessarily thesis and antithesis either, but two sides of the same coin. If we want to think about what life is, we need to think, where does life end? And it's death. And where death ends, theoretically, life would begin. So they belong together. They cannot be separate. You cannot synthesize life and death into a higher form of life which doesn't have death. You need both. Which is why much radical collectivism, which neglects its responsibility and necessity to educate the individual as its important and constituent part, fails on a theoretical, conceptual, dialectical level. Bakunin was quick to point this out in his Statism and Anarchy, as was Stalin in Anarchism or Socialism. Well, yeah, Bakunin kind of backs me up, isn't he? The anarchist is not for the liberation of the individual before the liberation of the collective, but as a dialectical motion of both at the same time, where we ascend the collective through individuals and the individuals ascend the collective. And we shed and subblade them to a higher plane while we shed the bullshit. While we shed capitalist modes of production in our local communities, for example, as individuals and collective become freer and freer. Enough Hegel. How then are we expected to watch a single instant of society, one small corner of the world, liberate itself from a global domination of statehood and coercion? It would seem unreasonable to hold such expectations. However, it is not we, the Marxists, who hold the anarchists in such high expectations, but anarchists themselves. Such as a cannibalistic ideology. What? Well, my explanation so far should suffice to completely argue against this paragraph here. Alright, next capital. Sorry, I slipped a German word in there. I mean, of course, next chapter. Infeasibility of abolition. I have so far presupposed a certain knowledge as to what the state is intrinsically. To the average person, the state is merely the sum of its parts, the police, the military, the government, and the other state actors. But this analysis of the state presupposes that these things already exist. Did they decide to merge of the woods today? No. They are the byproduct of very specific conditions which arose within human society. But if these things are a byproduct, then they cannot be what the state intrinsically is. Why do these things exist? Because class struggle exists. For as long as there have been states, there has existed class struggle, and never has a state existed without class first arising. We hold this truth to be foundation upon which our analysis of the state is based. I don't think anything with this is fundamentally wrong. The idea of never has a state existed without class first arising, this is something we cannot really prove, but I think it is true enough because as far back as we can look into ancient societies, they tended to have both slavery and kings. So, I mean, I've actually read up about some, and I can't really point you to it now, but I've read up on some not class-based, more early, late Stone Age societies which ran in a more decentralized fashion, but don't quote me on this. And of course the Greek democracy and isonomia, which I actually wanted to read a book about very soon. I'm just gonna put this here as quickly as an idea. Equality of law. The rule of the people has the fairest name of all equality, and does none of those things that a monarch does. The lot determines officers' power is held accountable, and deliberation is conducted in public. So I'm just gonna put this out there, that even ancient civilizations have had different modes of organization already than class-based ones. But how big those were is up to debate, and I'm gonna say that yes, a state would have to be a manifestation of a class taking over the position and the place of power. The state represents itself as a primary manifestation of this class struggle, as it uses the police, the army, the government, etc. as means to enforce the rule of one class over another, mitigate class conflict. I went into the definition of state a little bit earlier, where I posited that the Marxist analysis just reduces us all to class struggle, instead of recognizing that power can have its own interest and its own will to perpetuate itself and retain itself. That power first arose through class distinction is not a fact I will want to debate at all. But what I want to say is that even with the abolishment of supposed class, economic class distinctions, we would still have a governing class, which is inherently a power imbalance, and the class would still want to perpetuate its own class interest, in that the governing class would not want to give up their privilege, which is also why dissolution of the state doesn't function. But okay, let's read further. We take it from this that it becomes quite apparent that you, nor I, nor anyone else on this earth can hope to abolish the state without first either abolishing or circumventing class struggle completely. Yes, I agree. I think. But we this is actually really funny. You say you want to imply the anarchists are implying that we can abolish the state before we abolish class struggle. Well, instead, the anarchists agree with you, but the anarchists say that we also cannot abolish the state after we abolish class struggle if we still have a governing class, because the governing class will perpetually reinforce their own class interests of being governing. We just created a new class struggle. The anarchist goes further in his pessimism and analysis than you do. Realize this. The reason anarchists want grassroots and council democratic republics and want to educate the masses and their people to reach competent levels of theoretical understanding it's exactly this. We don't want to create the vanguard that becomes its own class and enforces its own class interests. Class interest is not just economic. As soon as you have a position of power, you have a vested interest in maintaining that position of power. This is amazing. We're getting onto something here, Anarchists go further than you. I don't disagree with any of this. I just go further, my friend. Okay, let's continue. You cannot hope to abolish class struggle without first abolishing class itself, which would require the proletariat to already have achieved victory over the state in all states of the world entirely, which, if done, would negate the need for the entire topic of discussion. However, we still exist in a world with states and classes, and so it becomes necessary to analyze how we may circumvent the struggle between classes if possible. How can class struggle be circumvented? The revolution would be required to not only be spontaneous but global in all countries of the world and simultaneous. Oh my, what a little cute story. This is very believable, my friend. For shitting on anarchists of thinking that you locally organized can create any feasible liberation. Yeah, this is a real fantasy story, my friend. Yeah. Not only this, but they would also need to be continuously successful in every state on earth. Only then these very specific conditions are met can we circumvent class struggle, the need for elements of class power. Oh, I see. You're going into this trying to prove that you need the vanguard party to fight for this. I already addressed this. A party, a position, a place of power has its own class interest, not economic class, but power is capital. This makes them the owners of power. You understand? You understand how when you don't educate your population to be theoretically woke and lucid and aware enough, that how will you dissolve the state if the state, even after all these supposed hypotheticals that are completely unrealistic and unbelievable occur, how will the state dissolve itself if the ruling class realizes, hey, wait a minute. We have privilege. We have a position of power. We have benefits over all these people. We have a privileged position. Why would we give this up? These people aren't capable to run society on their own. These people don't know how the state works. We've taken care of them with our bureaucracy, with our leadership. Should we get rid of ourselves? Looking like two officials with way better luxury goods and foods than the people look each other into the eyes and then look at their luxury goods, look at each other into the eyes and go, maybe we can come up with some way to justify our continued existence? Maybe. To believe otherwise is naive. The anarchist reading of this will most likely scoff and attempt to suggest that I am intentionally stacking the odds against them. No, I didn't. I'm not. I would encourage that same anarchist to try and debunk the previous points made. If they cannot void the necessity of elements of class power. Well, amazing that I already did this. Anarchism is inapplicable to the material world. Revolution is a science, and it requires a study and practice. It requires a model based on trial and error. If a scientific theory is not applicable to our world, it is scrapped in favor of one that is. If a revolutionary theory isn't applicable to this, then it must be scrapped. Is this going to imply that anarchism never worked? I thought we already went over the communism never worked arguments, and no, why it's bullshit. Oh my god. Are you one of those People's Republic of China people? Please say no. If you say yes, I'm going to be very sad, because I've approached this with very much theoretical good faith here, and I've explained quite a bit of stuff to you, hoping that you would listen to it and accept to it, and just don't fall to that level. I'm begging. Please, please, please. Anyways, I've shown you how anarchism is applicable to the real material world. I agree with that revolution as a science that we have study and practice, but I also think we need to teach it, we need to spread it. It requires a model based on trial and error. Yeah, probably, I agree. We need to see what solutions we can make workable in our communities, in our broader structures, in our nations, and so on, and we need to figure out how to solve issues as they arise. Trial and error is, by the way, a good point. Challenging unjust hierarchies as an anarchist principle, by the way, is one of self-recreation, of one of self-generation. We establish hierarchies if we deem them necessary, and then examine them further and say, if they are necessary, we abolish them. We construct ourselves anew. We must be willing to build something up and destroy it completely in order to restart from zero if it fails. We need to be rebuilding and rebuilding and rebuilding and reconceptualizing and having new ideas constantly. I agree with this. Anarchism is not a scientific theory of revolution that hasn't been shown to be has shown to be not applicable to our world. Your debunking of anarchism has been very surface level and very strawmanny, and it doesn't actually like deal with any of the specific ideas of anarchism in any detail. Mostly, you just posited like some Marxist ideas and suppose that anarchists are too dumb or too idealistic to understand them. All right, let's continue on. After I drink another sip of water. Cultural interpretation. Most modes of productions. It's starting to wear on me, my friends. It's starting to wear on me. I'm not used to talking this long. Modes of production, that being the predominant way in which a society handles property relations as they relate to the economy, shape economics. Shape economics, yes, they shape economics, yes. Since property relations are the base of all societies, economics itself, a base by which many things spawn up and or are shaped by it, of these structures, economics interacts most directly and most importantly with culture. This makes sense. You cannot first begin to furnish a house if the house itself has not yet been built. The bourgeois own your house and use their wealth to furnish it in a way they please. You cannot begin to reconstruct culture, which is a superstructure, without furthering the economy, which is a base. This is explaining the basic idea of superstructure and material conditions influencing each other. This entire model is actually a bit more complicated. Alright, here we are. So, as it was put there, is that culture is the big one. Instead, it is ideology. Base is the means of productions, the tools, the factories, the land, the raw materials, the relations of productions between proletariat and bourgeois, basically, and shapes and maintains the superstructure, which includes all forms of culture, but also law, media, politics, science, education, ideology. This is the realm of idealism. And this maintains and shapes the base. Interesting. Do you see something? This is a dialectic. Because we have two things that represent two sides of the same coin, influence each other, shape each other in a complex, non-binary way. This is not thesis, antithesis. This is negation and sublation. Friend, this is dialectics. Yeah. Alright, let's not simplify it then to culture, but let's stick with ideology. This is a way in which, for example, Marxists... Let's not say Marxist. Let's say your claim that anarchism is not workable is an ideological claim. It has been shaped and has been maintained by relations of production and means of production. In a sense, if we want to abstract it in a dialectical notion, your historical knowledge and your surrounding social relations, in which you're probably surrounding yourself with other Marxists who tell you the same stuff, shape and maintain your idea, your ideology. That anarchism doesn't fails to account all of these things. Your ideology then maintains and shapes the way in which you interact with people, because you probably have like a small disdain towards anarchists, or rather you read anarchist literature with your ideas already in mind, and even though the text would posit new enlightening ideas, you kind of dismiss them out of hand because your knowledge of what you think an anarchist thinks and does already is brought into this. And this then reinforces again your ideas. So you can see this is a vicious cycle. Good that you bring it up, because this shows me that you actually like know what a dialectic is, although your earlier notion was kind of not on point. Now, the bourgeois own your house and use their wealth to furnish it how we please. You cannot begin to reconstruct culture, which is a superstructure, without furthering the economy, which is the base. See, this is also, again, Marxist logic. Just seize the base and the superstructure will itself change. You know what I did when I said educate people? I said, hey, let's build stuff in our communities. Let me actually... I said, let's build stuff in our communities where we actually create solid means of production, like workers' co-ops, in the base, build housing cooperatives, and like social projects where we educate anarchist people to help them in their material conditions in the here and now, make living cheaper, give better, fairer workplaces, to make them understand how socialism works, give them some faith in the idea, and help them to get some theoretical education, which then will lead them to spread more anarchist and socialist structures and workplaces and so on in the material world. Must be some naive anarchist fantasy shit that doesn't account for this at all, right? This dialectic. Probably. Yeah, true. We just want to reconstruct culture without seizing the economy, which is the base. Yeah. You know, we do both at the same time because we realize that answers aren't simple. We can't just take one of the two sides, but instead you gotta work on both at the same time. It will return to this point, by the way, that I just arrogantly claim that anarchism has a much more complicated analysis and a much better understanding of the dialectic than you guys. When people think of anarchy, they think of chaos. This is true because we're getting strawman quite a bit. To the credit of anarchists, chaos is not their goal. However, order is not the general understanding of anarchy. It is. Anarchies, I've read it like slogans of anarchists like order without government. Government is not what creates order, but rules, agreements. Anarchists can have rules. We can agree on rules. We can collectively shape the rules we want for our collective. Anyways, chaos is not an ideal of the working class. As a matter of fact, humans prefer security in order to almost anything else and only begin to evolve an expansion of freedom after security is found in order. Sure. This is quite understandable. Humans' first and foremost instinct is self-preservation as with any other species of animal. Yeah, whatever. What does this have to do with culture? Capitalism necessitates a state to maintain its security. Because economic systems inherently influence culture in a major way, the state as a form of order and security for capitalism becomes culturally a form of order and security in the mind of the general populations. Yes. While historically people have found forms of security outside of the state, today the popular consensus is the absence of state leads to general chaos. Not just today the popular consensus is this, but I already earlier traced it back to Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. In order to prevent this, we would have to change the cultural interpretation of anarchy for a broad amount of the entire society. Oh yeah. If you go into like terms not being like helpful or good optics, or I'm with you, absolutely. I mean, go up to American and say communism, and they're gonna like, communism. Oh. I agree. We need to like reinvent these terms. We need to either find better terms or teach people the meaning of these terms. Of course, this itself represents an insoluble contradiction. Anarchists cannot hope to conduct a revolution while the culture of the society remains opposed to statelessness as a form of chaos, but they also cannot bring change to their culture in any significant way until they've seen the means of economic power. Oh god, this is such a simplistic argument. Listen, anarchists are not like Marxists who say, let's have a spontaneous revolution and take hold of the means of production. We believe in gradual, some anarchists don't believe in gradual change, but I personally think everyone who believes in spontaneous revolution is kind of a lunatic and idealist. We believe in the gradual kinds of changes that I outlined. As I explained, we will work on both sides. We will work on the superstructure and on the base. We will change the culture by talking and educating, and we will change the base by building actual lived examples of exactly what we mean. And we can do that. Workers' co-ops are possible. I don't even know. This is... I already addressed most of this anyways. This contradiction actually gives us great insights as to why anarchism has never fallen into favor with the broad masses, and also explains why anarchist experiments have only existed in places where the security of the individual was already not guaranteed, because it represented a break in the contradiction. I mean, if you're gonna say that anarchism was never popular because we never had the optics and the good way to advertise for our concept in a way that people would understand its theory and so on, and that this is the only reason that this works in like crisis regions like Syria or Spain in the civil war period, I would agree, because yes, obviously even our leftist comrades over on the Marxist side of things don't understand what anarchism is, so how can we expect the general public to? Which is why I'm very invested in educating people on the topic in real life. Of course, we are not dealing with such conditions, and indeed, such conditions are actually quite rare in the age of global capitalism, which is true. We take it as such that anarchism is culturally incompatible with society, which is bullshit. But I already went over this. Wouldn't this also apply to Marxism, as most people think that socialism leads to dictatorship? Well, in a sense, this is correct. However, three incredibly important points must be made. Humanity lived in a political dictatorship for hundreds of years prior to the existence of the first modern bourgeois republic. Even if people believe that socialism, or more specifically Marxist socialism, always creates a dictatorship of the few, they are still on average more likely to support this over what they find to be general chaos. This is true. Marxist ideas seem to be, in the optics perspective, to be more attractive. This is something to work on, absolutely. Marx's words are quite popular over time. Marx's work and influence has had on economics have drawn a great deal of the population. The economic writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels have become not only easy to find in most American and first world college campuses, but also are even sometimes mandatory reads for the classes which a person may attend. Absolutely true. I support Marxist literature. I think it's very important, and I also draw theoretically a lot from it. You will find that people don't quite as often read Lenin or Trotsky or any other given later communist writer. Same as they don't read Bookchin or Emma Goldman. They're just putting it out there. I think I agree. And I think it would be helpful to get more anarchist readings out, yeah. I mean, for example, Noam Chomsky is read quite a bit. His analysis come from a very anarchist perspective. He is identifying as an anarcho-syndicalist, and he has written multiple books analyzing state structure, media structure, and modern capitalism, and has generally spread the word about the principle of challenging unjust hierarchies quite a bit. So he's being read, and I've encountered Noam Chomsky in my own studies at university in all of my subjects. I've encountered him in computer science for his linguistic contributions in terms of generative grammar and universal grammar. I've encountered him in my English classes, both as a cultural critic and as a linguist, and I've encountered him in my educational classes about teaching, because I want to be a teacher. By the way, this feeds into this narrative. I'm studying to become a teacher in Germany. In his educational theories about his theories about language acquisition and teaching in general. So Chomsky is read quite well. He's one of the most respected political and cultural commentators today, so he's certainly being read. And a lot of the French post-structuralists have been very anarchist-leaning. So, and those are certainly being read, at least in philosophy classes. Okay, let's continue. Capitalism is in decline. Capitalism, at least in its name, is no longer very favorable with the masses. Yes, that's true. The recent troubles with the economy have shown much of the masses that the economy does not work for them. They do not view the term capitalism as something favorable. They view the term socialism as very favorable. Even if they don't quite know what it means, they are looking for alternative capitalism. With the above 2 points stated, it is no wonder the Marxists have become more popular. I'm glad that they are. And I'm also in support of socialism. An anarchist is simply a synonym for libertarian socialist. We want socialism with different organizational principles. We want the same thing. I just have a critique that is a bit going against some of the things you propose. And man, I don't want to be an enemy. I just think there's some worries unaddressed in the way you go about things, as I pointed out in long detail across this video so far. Millennials would rather live in a socialist or communist nation than in a capitalist poor riches. And thanks for one thought, but I already agree with this. So, final analysis. Let's see. Anarchism was born as a reaction to the overt nationalism which plagued the world at the time of its birth. Both these represent direct opposites to one another, which exist in a dialectic. Okay, first of all, we've went over this. This is a very old and simplistic conception of it. Afterwards, after Marx, anarchism has become largely a critique and expansion upon Marx. I've not met an anarchist who would reject Marx. Both of these represent direct opposites to one another, which exist in a dialectic. Dialectic is more complicated than you make it out to be. We talked about that. Spontaneous revolution of the broad masses are unfeasible as they assume equal levels of development, both politically and economically, which is unnatural to the capitalist mode of production yet to be observed. We also talked about this quite a lot, about different ways to spread ideas and change base and superstructure at the same time. Anarchists have historically found themselves at odds with their own revolutions as they failed to secure their ideals in whole. This is true. Anarchists cannot abolish the state because it is a manifestation of class struggle and institutionalized class power, which represents itself as a necessity as a class struggle is omnipresent. Communists cannot abolish the state because the manifestation of class struggle and institutionalized class power, which represents itself as a necessity as class struggle is omnipresent, because state power is class power. Lastly, anarchism is culturally incompatible with society. This I debunked. The cultural interpretation of the term anarchy is the same as chaos. Because of this, they are prevented from attaining a revolution until they change the culture of society. Listen, again, in the US, you had the Red Scare. Communist has been a slur. Nobody fucking knew what communism was. Communism was prohibited at academia. I'm just gonna say to you outright, this can change. And it should change. And you, just as me, should be concerned with thinking about this and worrying about this question of education. You know, we don't just take the masses as what they are. We want to bring them up, right? We want to make them better. We want to help them grow. So we don't just accept that they think anarchy means chaos just as much as we don't accept them thinking communism means like authoritarian Stalinism. I'm with you. I've educated people on communism and on Marx. I'm absolutely with you, helping people to understand these terms and get a theoretical grounding. And if I were to give a class on Marxism, I wouldn't actually influence them like ideologically. I would present the theory and discuss the theory. And we could go over all the criticisms and whether or not they are applicable and what can be criticized and if not. You know, this is a matter of like actually having discussions, not about like this fucking tribalism that this entire video was about, strawmanning anarchism back to the fucking early 18th century and just claiming 19th century and claiming all these ludicrous things about them and not having actually engaged with anarchist theory or literature at all. Like, you are currently actively contributing to the idea and the conception of what anarchism is, and you are doing the left a disservice with this. Alright. Sorry for getting a bit ranty. Let's get back to it. So to change culture, we'll need to depose the bourgeois, but they kind of begin to do so until we have changed culture. I talked about this. In the midst of these analyses, we find anarchism to be incomplete and an implical strand of the proletarian ideology. Well, I said my piece.